The Sherlock Holmes Advent Calendar. The Redeemer's Coming by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Nora Godwin. Narrated by Peter Silverleaf. 1. An inspector arrives. It was just a few days before Christmas when Holmes and I got roped into a rather peculiar undertaking. Unaware of our future endeavours, we spent a quiet morning in Baker Street. Holmes sat with a pipe in his armchair, thoroughly immersed in the reading of my notes on the Marley blackmailing case, which we had sadly solved a year ago. Ignoring his regular sighing and head-shaking, I dedicated myself to decorating the premises for the upcoming Christmas days. It was my attempt to bring in a little Christmas spirit. According to German custom, which the royal family had also introduced in England, I decorated the living room with fir branches and cones. Holmes had resolutely prohibited me from putting up an entire Christmas tree, but the soon-to-be dry needles would spread all over the apartment soon anyways. I also set up colourful candles and small painted angel-iced figures, which were, admittedly, somewhat tasteless in their baroque form. Finally, I hung a mistletoe branch on the front of the door, which fully warmed my heart. Outside, the appropriate weather provided the perfect atmosphere. A crackling blanket of snow already covered the streets of London. Thick white flakes still fell from the sky and danced artfully to the ground. On the streets, busy people were rushing around, loaded with all sorts of purchases, more or less necessary for a successful Christmas fest. Holmes, of course, did not care much about all the hassle. "You know, my dear Watson," he began, when he finished reading my report, "we won't be able to publish this. The case doesn't show us in the most favourable light." "If you look at it from a moral point of view, however," I corrected immediately. "We should stick to our usual criminological approach," Holmes interrupted me. "After all, we are investigating crimes. The redistribution of wealth is not our cup of tea, and we should leave that to Robin Hood. Bear in mind that if the general public learns about it, nobody will entrust their cases to us any more. Our business would be ruined. I would be ruined." "Don't worry, Holmes," I said as I poured myself a cup of hot punch. "I'll wait until you're pushing daisies, of course." "Very considerate," Holmes said with an appreciative nod. "But you also have to work on your narrative style. You are always making these only halfway amusing remarks. You should stick to the facts. That's what really interests the inquisitive and willing reader. Your jokes only distract from the course of events. They are unnecessary, just like your infantile Christmas decorations. You're an adult man, for God's sake." "The magic of Christmas is not only for children," I taught my friend with a smile. "Relax, absorb the atmosphere, rejoice in the birth of the Redeemer." "I would rather be relieved of this practice," Holmes replied dryly. "I doubt a little that these affected actions and attitudes were a central concern of the Messiah. Nothing is more banal and bleak than Advent season, and then, to top it all off, it also culminates in the Christmas holidays. I really could use a little variety, a criminal challenge." "So your most intimate Christmas wish is a crime?" I said. "Yes, very much so," Holmes muttered. "Murder, conspiracy, double murder, that's what I need." Holmes did, certainly involuntarily, his best to sabotage my Christmas mood, but it was about to get even worse, because the next thing we heard was a knock on the door. "This is going to be our double murderer," I said laconically. "Hopefully," Holmes added. When I opened, however, Inspector Lestrade stood in the door, coat and hat covered with white snowflakes. "Ah, Inspector Lestrade," shouted Holmes, jumping out of the chair. "You are a godsend." The inspector stepped in and shook the snow on his clothes a little rudely on our carpet. "Sorry to disappoint you, Holmes," he said, "but I'm actually here on behalf of my superior." Then he was already on the scent and demonstratively stretched his nose in the air. "Do I smell punch? I could use a cup." "Please, suit yourself," I dutifully said, trying to be a good host, and walked over to the pot to pour a cup for Lestrade. He immediately took a sip, looked around the room, and remarked, "Such a nice Christmas decor, too." "Yes, yes," Holmes replied animatedly, before I could say anything. "That's Watson's fault. What are you here for? It must undoubtedly be an urgent, complex case that Scotland Yard is asking for my assistance for, right?" Lestrade nodded. "You're truly the greatest detective of all time," he said. "How did you guess that?" "Leave the jokes," warned Holmes with a serious expression. "Please, give me just the facts." "As you like," Inspector Lestrade replied, and sat down in the second armchair with his wet coat. He took another big sip from the punch and took a deep breath. "Well," he began, "then let's get started. There is, in fact, an investigation in a murder case going on right now. However, the circle of environment is a fairly delicate terrain, you need to know." "That's what I specialize in," Holmes replied immediately, "as you know." Inspector Lestrade smiled tormentedly and tilted his head. "Well, maybe not on that," he continued. "Our murder victim is a clergyman, a monk, to be precise." All sorts of humorous remarks about Brother Tuck shot through my head, but fortunately I was able to suppress them. Instead, I just said, "The pious man would have better not left the walls of the convent." To my surprise, Inspector Lestrade replied, "He did not have to. The crime took place inside the building, to be precise, in the Redeemer's Abbey at Twickenham." Holmes immediately perked up. "In Redeemer's Abbey?" he repeated, asking, "This is a Catholic institution, if I am not mistaken, and I'm never wrong." "Quite right," Lestrade confirmed. "They are Franciscan friars, the order of the Minor Friars." Admittedly, the expression "minor friars" triggered a frivolous chain of thoughts in my head, and apparently it did the same to Holmes. "To what extent are these friars minor?" he asked, seemingly awkward. "Pure modesty?" "They profess poverty," Inspector Lestrade explained, which finally gave me the opportunity to throw in, "So they are rather less well off." The inspector looked at me punitively and continued, "This order is in the tradition of St. Francis of Assisi, and is a mendicant order." "I understand," Holmes said. "Is this fact somehow related to the murder or its motive?" "We don't know," Inspector Lestrade replied. "To be honest, we know very little so far, but that's why I'm here. The Catholic Archbishop, Cardinal Manning, has personally suggested that you are to be consulted. Understandably, he is keen on having the case solved by Christmas." Holmes didn't hesitate for a second, saying, "And solved it will be." "But we don't know any background or circumstances yet," I said. "Inspector Lestrade could not even tell us how the monk died. Isn't it a bit early to make such a promise? Especially seeing that this promise will be given to the highest dignitary of the Catholic Church in England." Holmes immediately brushed off my objection. "My dear Watson, the Cardinal faithfully puts the case in my hands. Do you have neither trust nor faith?" I demonstratively frowned. "In you, Holmes, or in God?" "Does that make a difference?" said Holmes, smiling provocatively. Inspector Lestrade rose from his chair, handing me his empty cup. "Holmes," he said, "honouring your arrogant blasphemy, but time is running. Our trolley, which will take us to the crime scene, is waiting down the road, so if you were kind enough to prepare for your departure—" Holmes nodded at me, and in all haste I gathered everything necessary. My friend, however, took an old book off the shelf after a short search, and calmly sat down in his usual place to browse through it. "Impeccable timing for a read," Inspector Lestrade said. "Should you rather deal with the case?" "I am," Holmes replied, showing the inspector the label on the back of the book. It was the Bible. "It's nice that you want to read into the matter," Inspector Lestrade noted, "but it might take a while if you are now just starting." Holmes shook his head. "I'm skipping the Jewish part," he said, referring to the Old Testament. "Ah, there we go, Matthew. The family tree of Jesus. 46 generations from Abraham to David and Solomon to Joseph. I understand. Oh, wait, something is amiss. Did the evangelist slip up?" asked Lestrade with angelic patience. That too, but that's not what this is about, Holmes said. The patrilineal lineage listed here is obsolete. Jesus is the Son of God, the Virgin Mary received him from the Holy Spirit, then Joseph is not the father of Jesus. Jesus is not related to Joseph and all his ancestors, from Abbyhood to Zadok, in alphabetical terms. What is the point of this collection? It is deliberate deception, but easily transparent, downright stupid. Don't take it the wrong way, Inspector, but that's not a good basis for a religion. I was done packing our bags by now, but I had listened to everything, and now I came back. My dear Holmes, I remarked, I think Cardinal Manning would like to see you focus your criminal zeal on the murder case, not on the most sacred foundations of the Catholic faith. Who knows what kind of swindle you would reveal? In the end, it is all just lies and deceit. But Watson, Holmes said after a brief period of thought, do you know how many wars have been and will be fought in the name of God, or to enforce or defend the pure, right faith? Imagine if there was no religion, and no more reasons to kill or die. It's as easy as that, if you try. You're a dreamer, Holmes, said Inspector Lestrade. The inspector might have been right, though Holmes rarely let his peaceful side show, which made me ask myself whether he was caught up in a sort of Christmas spirit that I had tried to create. However, soon my hopes should be ruined. All right, time for blood and thunder, he suddenly shouted, as if he had suddenly awakened from a daydream, and enthusiastically clapped his hands. The best clues are given when the body is still warm. You have your dissection cutlery with you, Watson? And that was all of Holmes's Christmas spirit. 30 seconds of peaceful thoughts. Yes, I replied rebelliously, but I fear that the corpse has already cooled, especially at this time of year, maybe even frozen. Gentlemen, Inspector Lestrade interjected, whining, could we possibly discuss this on our way? After all, our vehicle is waiting. Go, go, Watson, Holmes shouted at me, pointing to the bags I provided. You heard the inspector. Let's get moving. With these words, Holmes took his coat, pinched the Bible under his arm, walked first through the front door, and left me with our luggage, leaving me the pack mule as always. I followed Holmes down to the snowy street, while Inspector Lestrade at least held the door open for me. Arriving downstairs, a police carriage was already ready for us. To our surprise, however, it was an iron cart with tiny barred windows, as it was otherwise used for prisoner transfers. Seriously? I asked, and Inspector Lestrade replied, You must excuse the trouble. All the other service vehicles were occupied. This one will have to suffice. But can't we just take the train? I moaned. The inspector shook his head. The train is only driving to Richmond. The rest of the line is closed due to the unusually large amount of snow in Middlesex. Well, Watson, for the next ride I promise you we will have a reindeer sled, with bells. And so we made our way to the southwest in the cold, rumbling prison carriage, to Twickenham, where an absolutely non-Christmassy murder case was waiting for us. And even my optimistic hope that the case would be solved quickly should be bitterly disappointed.